Years of fighting in Syria has left the country devastated. The conflict has claimed the lives of nearly 500,000 people. Furthermore, about half the Syrian population has been internally displaced, and about 5 million are registered as refugees. Yet, sooner or later, the war will end, and the reconstruction of Syria will start. But even then, the fallout of the war and the geopolitical divisions of the country will be felt for decades to come. My name is Shirvan and welcome to Caspian Report. War, in addition to its destructive power, is expensive. In 2013, at the backdrop of the Syrian conflict, the economic output of Syria decreased by 40%. To compensate for the financial deficit, al-Assad cut subsidies on food, water, and energy. But it wasn't enough. By 2015, Syria had depleted its foreign exchange reserves. Hence, imported goods became more scarce and expensive. As such, within a short span of time, food, water, and energy prices increased. In some regions, the prices nearly doubled. At the same time, airstrikes destroyed much of the infrastructure across the country. This resulted in additional shortages of water and energy throughout the country. Last year, government forces took back Aleppo, which is the economic core of Syria. However, years of intense fighting have imposed extensive damage to the city. Currently, the situation in Aleppo is somewhat similar to Berlin in 1946. It will take years to repair the basic infrastructure. Meanwhile, the agricultural heartland of Syria, which sits in the northeast of the country, is still contested by ISIS and Kurdish militant forces and thus out of al-Assad's reach. Essentially, these factors imply that al-Assad cannot rely on the revenues from Syria's economic and agricultural cores. In a war-torn country, whoever controls the basic needs and services will be perceived as the authority. Thus, food, water, and energy shortages undermine al-Assad's ability to exert control. Even in regions that are technically retaken by government forces, the authority of Damascus is still in question. If the situation is left unaddressed, it will result in a new crisis. So the future of Syria depends as much on reconstruction efforts as on military victories. Currently, however, there exists no roadmap to rebuild Syria. In fact, it's not even certain how much it will cost. The figures for the endeavor diverge enormously. Some estimates converge at around 300 billion, while others put the number at $1 trillion. For comparison, Syria's total planned government spending for 2017 was worth a little over $5 billion. Thus, either way, rebuilding Syria is beyond the capacity of the local government. And since nobody can afford a black hole in the Middle East, rebuilding Syria will fall upon the international community. Yet, with multiple sanctions on Syria and calls for additional restrictions, international donors are effectively hindered from the reconstruction process, and those with the funds, such as the European Union and the Gulf states, will only go ahead with a political concession which is unlikely to happen. Thus, in the absence of a peace treaty or an outright winner, rebuilding Syria will be as fragmented as the country's de facto borders. As of this writing, the Syrian government and its allies have the upper hand in the war as they control the south and the west of the country. This includes most of the population zones, and it means that al-Assad will continue to remain a central figure in Syria. However, the president's reach does not extend into the Kurdish and Turkish-controlled territories in northeast and North Syria, respectively. These geopolitical divisions are likely to remain in place and develop rival areas in isolation from each other, meaning the United States, the European Union, Turkey, and the Gulf states will focus on reconstruction efforts in their respective backed territories. For instance, Turkey hosts about 3 million Syrian refugees and plans to build new towns for them in North Syria. Once the Turkish-controlled area is secure, Ankara also plans to establish and train new Syrian state bodies such as law enforcement agencies. The Turkish involvement in Syria is due to its concerns that the Kurdish presence in the region is a threat to the territorial integrity of Turkey. Hence, policymakers in Ankara are doing whatever they can to disrupt a Kurdish coalition that stretches from Syria to Iraq. The Turkish occupation of the region north of Aleppo serves that goal. However, to maintain a long-term presence in Syria, Erdogan must present his objective as a humanitarian relief mission. So, in truth, the Turkish reconstruction efforts for the Syrian refugees is a calculated geopolitical decision. Erdogan will likely negotiate with European and Gulf states to acquire funds to bring in private contractors and start with the reconstruction. Yet, these undertakings will have a limited impact on Syria's overall economic recovery because Damascus still controls the biggest population zones. Yet, given al-Assad's international isolation, he has little choice in partners that can be trusted with the reconstruction efforts. Moreover, allies such as Putin are struggling with their own financial shortcomings. As such, in January 2017, Syria could not even afford to import the required amount of wheat from Russia, despite the discount. Furthermore, Russia's interests in the region are meant to bolster its international reputation and persuade the former Soviet states to align their interests with that of Moscow. In other words, the Russians don't intend to stay or assist in rebuilding Syria. The Kremlin's reluctance to contribute to Syria's reconstruction was further reinforced in March 2017 when Russia's deputy foreign minister in charge of the Middle Eastern affairs stated that nothing should be expected from Russia in terms of financial aid. Moscow will still play a big role in Syria's offshore energy, trade and transport sectors, but Putin and al-Assad lack the funds for closer cooperation. Another potential investor is China. Under the One Belt, One Road initiative and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, Beijing's global economic influence has increased significantly. What's more is that the country holds about $3 trillion in foreign currency reserves, which shows that China has every capacity to play a major role in rebuilding Syria. However, China has its doubts as well. For one, Chinese policymakers fear that meddling in the civil wars of the Middle East could backfire against their country. As such, China could become a major target for jihadists. Second, Beijing doesn't want to provoke opposition from Russia and Iran, which could derail China's economic efforts in Central Asia and the Persian Gulf. Chinese firms will have an important presence in the Syrian energy sector, but overall, the risks outweigh the benefits. Therefore, China's role in the reconstruction of Syria will be limited. This leaves Iran as the most feasible partner for the reconstruction of Syria. Over the course of the civil war, Tehran has already extended loans worth up to $10 billion to Damascus. This has enabled al-Assad to fund the war effort and keep the essential governmental branches operational. At the present, Iranian-based companies are competing for economic and industrial concessions from their Syrian counterparts. Recently, Iran agreed to invest in Syria's energy, telecommunications, and agricultural sectors, and more lucrative agreements are expected for the industrial sectors. However, Iran's financial assistance is an investment, not an act of charity, and since al-Assad lacks the funds to repay the investor, Tehran will seek to create economic ties that will ensure its long-term geopolitical leverage over Damascus. Another important player is Lebanon. The fact of the matter is, Syria's bureaucracy is as complicated as its civil war. Entrepreneurs and banks from Lebanon are the only ones with experience in Syria's bureaucracy and in post-war reconstruction. Furthermore, Lebanon's geographic position also means that the country will serve as an important transit hub for materials and funds heading for Syria. So given Lebanon's experience and proximity, foreign companies will need to closely cooperate with Lebanese banks and entrepreneurs. If the financial terms are met, it will take Syria about 2 decades to reach its pre-war GDP. Yet, besides finances and politics, rebuilding the country does not simply mean restoring the infrastructure and constructing houses. The government will also need to create new jobs, resettle displaced persons and refugees, while at the same time resolve social and sectarian tensions. It goes without saying that the challenges ahead are enormous. Many of the basic issues will remain unaddressed. As such, a post-war Syria is likely to be poor and divided. Its population will depend on UN aid and remittances from its diaspora. Moreover, members of al-Assad's inner circle expect to be rewarded and empowered for their fealty. As a result, Damascus is likely to return to its old fault lines. This means that the segment of the nation will remain excluded from the political process, which will produce inconsistent results in terms of reintegration and reconciliation of Syrians. If the situation is not handled with care, Syria will emerge as a dysfunctional and isolated state that reigns over a divided land and relies on humanitarian aid and financial assistance. This was a Caspian report by me, Shirvan. For additional reports on Syria, check out our geopolitics playlist. In any case, I want to thank our contributors on Patreon for their support, and if you want to be part of that process, visit patreon.com/Caspian report for more information. Anyway, thank you for your time, and Sarol.